Hello, this is HT Wingnut, and today we're going to talk about SnapRAID for Windows. So what exactly is SnapRAID? Well, simply put, it's a free, open-source command line program that will protect your data disks using Parity and checksum. Unlike traditional RAID that manages Parity real-time, SnapRAID calculates Parity and checksum on demand, so it's effectively a snapshot of your data at a point in time, therefore the name SnapRAID. Its biggest caveat is that it works best with static data, or more importantly, data that is not frequently deleted or changed. This is because files are deleted before the next sync operation can cause a hole in the parity, resulting in potential data loss in a data recovery situation. There's ways to mitigate this, although it's not very practical or completely effective, but that will be discussed later in this video. So because of this, SnapRAID works best with archival data or media libraries like movies, music, programs, personal photos, and documents, or your vast collection of Linux ISOs. Basically stuff that you'd save and rarely edit or delete. This video is intended to provide practical examples to help get you up and running with SnapRAID for Windows, although it shouldn't be much different if you're using a Linux version. We will discuss how to set up and automate SnapRAID within Windows and also provide some recovery scenarios with examples as well. I'd also like to mention that SnapRAID is a great complement to the program called StableBit DrivePool, so we will briefly discuss the caveats to using SnapRAID with DrivePool. Okay, so why do we need SnapRAID? Well, as far as Windows is concerned, support for any kind of software RAID or data validation is sorely lacking, so SnapRAID is a welcome option. Before we get into practical examples, let's briefly talk about Parity. You may be familiar with the more common types of RAID, which are striped RAID, like RAID 5 offering single disk parity, and RAID 6 with 2-disk parity. This kind of RAID handles both the read and write operation, including parity. So let's say you go to save a file. When you save a file like this kitten.jpg image, it takes your data and splits it into blocks equal to the number of disks in your array less the parity level. So in this example, a 4-disk RAID 5 consisting of disks D1, D2, D3, and D4 will split each block of the file into 3 parts because 4 disks minus 1 parity is 3. These blocks are broken into smaller chunks, like this. A1, A2, A3, B1, B2, B3, C1, C2, C3, so on and so forth. And then it calculates parity for each set of those chunks equal to, in this case, we'll call them A sub P, B sub P, and C sub P. That just stands, P stands for parity. Those chunks of data are then evenly distributed across your hard drives in your RAID array, along with the calculated parity bits, staggering parity across the drives. This kind of parity is calculated real time when the data is saved to the drives. With SnapRAID, on the other hand, you can use your data disks like you normally would as a regular NTFS drive in Windows. SnapRAID doesn't know your data exists until you execute a SnapRAID command to update parity, validate data, or restore data. So when calculating parity, SnapRAID will read the files from the existing data disks and calculate parity at the block level on each disk. The calculated parity values are then stored on its own separate disk, and unlike traditional RAID, with SnapRAID, parity is calculated on demand instead of real time. One parity drive can protect multiple data disks. The more drives and data you have, however, it's advisable to utilize additional parity disks. SnapRAID claims to support up to 42 data disks along with 6 parity drives. The SnapRAID FAQ provides recommendations on how many parity drives to use based on the number of data drives you have. So how does parity work then, and how does it protect your data? Well, parity is calculated using some complex math that I can't quite wrap my head around personally, but we'll look at how it works conceptually. Just think of it like a single variable algebra equation. So in this case, we have 3 disks, D1, D2, and D3, and 1 parity drive, P1. Let's say there's a block of data on each disk, A1, A2, A3, and then the parity block, P. We'll arbitrarily assign values to each block. Say A1 is equal to 1, A2 is equal to 4, and A3 is equal to 3, and parity block P is what we need to solve for. So we just have to add these numbers together. So 1 plus 4 plus 3 equals P. We solve for P, and P equals 8. So then we replace the value of P with 8, and that's our parity bit. Now let's say a data disk dies, say disk D2. Poof. How can SnapRAID help recover? Well, back to that algebra equation, it can just solve for the missing piece on disk D2. So in this case, we've got 1 plus x plus 3 equals 8. We solve for x. After solving for x is equal to 4. Simple as that. So SnapRAID will go through every block to recover a file, folder, or full drive of data this way, and replace the missing data with the calculated data from the parity equation. Okay, so what do you need to get started with SnapRAID? Well, there's really just a few things. First, you need your data disks, the disks that you have your data on that you want to protect with SnapRAID. And that can be anywhere from 2 to a large number of other disks. And those can be on SSDs, hard drives, connected via USB or a SATA, doesn't matter. But you also, in addition to that, need at least one separate hard drive or SSD to store the Parity data on. And that drive needs to be at least as big as, if not bigger than, the largest capacity data drive that you have. So for example, if you have two data drives, a 4 terabyte and an 8 terabyte, you need at least an 8 terabyte, separate 8 terabyte drive to store Parity data on. Okay, so now we're going to actually go through the process to get SnapRAID set up on your system. First thing you're going to want to do is go to snapraid.it. And I recommend you look at the FAQ and the manual sections here because they're very detailed, very good information, and a lot of what I'm going through here can be found on those parts of this website. In any case, to get started, you want to download the SnapRAID program, which you just click on the download link here. Go to SnapRAID Windows x64 executable, zip file. Click it, download it. Once it downloads, go ahead and open it up. And then you want to extract it to whatever location. I'm going to put it in the default downloads folder and extract it. And then go to that location where you extracted the folder. You want to go ahead and copy that. Now you want to put this where you're going to actually be running SnapRAID from. In my case, I'm just going to put it in the root of C. So copy and paste it to C drive. Now you can see here it's got all this extra information on it. I want to rename it to a more friendly name like just SnapRAID. I'm going to go ahead and do that because we have to navigate to this folder from the command line. So I'm going to go ahead and open that folder now, and now you can see all this information in here. Two files of importance though are the snapraid.exe and the snapraid.conf.example. SnapRAID is obviously just the program SnapRAID, and then snapraid.conf.example is a template configuration file that you can use to edit because SnapRAID references the snapraid.conf file. So go ahead and copy that, paste it in the same folder, then rename it to snapraid.conf. And click OK or yes. Now you want to double click on this, right click Open As, and use Notepad to open it. Now we have our SnapRAID config file open. This is the file that SnapRAID references whenever it runs because it tells it what Parity drives to use, what data disks to use, where to look at the content files, etc. And I will go through each of the relevant sections here that we need to address. First thing you'll notice though is this hashtag. This hashtag basically just means a remark or comment for that line. So when SnapRAID reads this file, anything with the hashtag, it's just going to ignore everything to the right of that hashtag on that line. So you can leave comments or set up a configuration ahead of time. If you're not ready to implement it yet, just put hashtag in front of it and go from there. Now before we go ahead and update the information in here, first thing you're going to want to do is collect information about your drives, primarily the drive letters and or the mount points for the drives that you're going to use, both the data disks and the Parity drives. Now again, your data disks, you need at least 2 data drives and at least 1 Parity drive. Your data disks can have existing information on them. It doesn't matter as long as they're formatted as NTFS. And then the Parity drive, it needs to be formatted NTFS as well, but it also needs to be blank. Okay, so if you already have a number of disks with data on it, you're going to have to go and get a different disk just used for Parity. Now your Parity disk has to be at least as big as, if not bigger than, the largest capacity data drive. So if you've got like a 4 terabyte drive, an 8 terabyte drive, your Parity drive needs to be at least 8 terabytes in size and empty. So in my case, I am actually running what's called DrivePool. Now you don't need to be using DrivePool, I'm just using this as an example because it's a popular use case for SnapRAID. So I've got drive J and drive K as my data disks. Okay, so I go to Windows Explorer here, you can see drive J and drive K as my data drives. And each disk has about 20 gigs of data on it. I know that's not a lot, but just for demonstration purposes, I kept it small. And then the disks themselves are 240 gigabyte SSDs. My Parity disk here you can see is empty, and that is also a 240 gigabyte SSD. So it's at least as big as or bigger than my largest data disk. And if you insert a new disk into your computer and you don't see it here, just real quick, you can go down to your start menu, right click, go to disk management, and it may pop up here and say, do you want to initialize this disk? Say yes, and then go ahead and right click and add a new partition or volume, and then you want to format it as NTFS, assign a drive letter or a mount point, and go from there. Okay, so once you've collected that information, you can go back to your config file. Now my Parity drive is drive P, my data disks are drive J and K. So Parity disk, I'm going to put drive P. That's all you have to do. And this Parity here, that obviously identifies it as a Parity drive, and that's drive P, and then the file it's going to store in there is called snapraid.parity. Now this file is going to store all the Parity data, and it's going to be one gigantic file. So obviously if you have like many terabyte size disk, 10 terabyte disk, this file could be as big as 10 terabytes in size. So that's why you need your Parity drive to be at least as big as your data disk. Once you've identified your Parity disk, you can see down here you've got a section for multiple Parity. I'll do that in a different section or a different video. Just for now, we're going to set up with just 2 data disks and a single Parity drive. The process is the same if you just have one Parity drive, whether it's 2 data disks or 5, it doesn't matter. But I'm just using 2 just for example purposes. And then further down here, you can see the content section, and we'll go back to this section in a second. I like to do the data disk next. So now we want to identify the data disks. I can see here it's identified by data, followed by a space, and then a friendly name for that disk. In this case, it's using convention of D1 for disk 1, D2, and D3. Now this is pre-populated information, but we want to put in the stuff that we have. So in our case, we're going to put in the J drive, okay? J. And also our other data disk is drive K, right? Now you can also have it protect just a specific folder on that drive as well if you want to. You have that flexibility. In this case, I want to protect the entire disk. Or if you happen to have mount points instead, in this case, let's say I take my J drive and I have a mount point, I'm going to right click on that in disk management, right click and change drive letters and paths, go ahead and click add, and I'm going to add a mount point. And I like to add this to a folder called mount in my C drive, new folder mount, although it can be anywhere. And then once I do that, I want to create another folder in there and call it data1. All this is going to do is just create a pointer file. So if we go over to our C drive, where we created that mount point, data1, it's going to have the exact, basically it's a pointer to that disk. So it's the exact same information, whether it's on the J drive or on the mount point. Okay, so now back to our config file here. So instead of the J drive, if you have a mount point, right, you can just go ahead and go to that mount point, go in here, copy address, and put the mount point instead. Simple as that. Now I'm going to change this back to J drive just because that's what I want to use in this example. Now I'm going to make an aside here and talk specifically about DrivePool. So if you're not interested in DrivePool, go ahead and click on the next timestamp because it should be skip past this DrivePool section. Now if you're using DrivePool, it's important that you put the pool part folder in here as opposed to just the root of the drive. The reason for that is during a recovery process, it just makes it easier to recover your data. And so what I mean by that is if you go to your drive letters of the drives that are comprised in your drive pool, right? For example, here I've got drive J and drive K comprised of this, make up this drive pool D. You should see a pool part folder there, in this case the J drive, right? And if you don't see this, you can go to View, Options, Change Folder and Search Options, go to View, and then go down to the Hidden Files and Folders section here and click on Show Hidden Files, Folders, and Drives. And then it should show up here. So you want to go ahead and open up that pool part folder and right click on it and you can copy address and then you can just put it right here. Okay, same goes for mount points. If you go to your mount point, go to your pool part folder, copy address, and put it here. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to stick with the J drive. Okay, now we want to go to the K drive and do the same thing. Our second data drive, copy address, and put this here. Now another thing you're going to want to do with DrivePool is go to your DrivePool program, go to the section here that shows Manage Pool, and go up to Balancing option. Now here by default it chooses Balance Immediately. When you do this, it's going to balance it according to your balancers that are over here, right? Or the default if you don't have one set. Now what that will do is possibly in the background when the system is idle, it can move files around between disks, which normally, to get the best balance possible that you have set up. With SnapRAID, that's not a good idea because any data that's been moved from disk to disk can cause what's called a parity hole. Basically, it can make some files be unrecoverable during a recovery process if you happen to lose a disk. So what you want to do is you want to go to Do Not Balance Automatically. Okay, now this does not mean that your files won't be distributed across disks, because when you go to save to your DrivePool drive, even with this selected, it will still separate the files across disks according to whatever the balancer is set to. It just will not go through and optimize that in the background when it's idle. And that's what you want. You don't want disks moving from disk to disk in the background. So make sure you choose this option. Now there are ways around this, and I'll probably make a separate video about how to use multiple parity and how that can reduce your chances of getting a parity hole on recovery, but that won't be part of this video. So once you do that, go ahead and hit save. And now say for example though, over time you notice that you are getting out of balance. You can go ahead and always do a manual rebalance, right? And poof. But once you do a rebalance, make sure you go to SnapRAID and actually run a SnapRAID sync at that time. Now one last thing that you're going to want to do, especially when you do an initial sync, is you want to disable the DrivePool service. This does not mean to close down this program because that does not stop the DrivePool service. You need to either go to your Task Manager by hitting Control-Shift-Escape or searching for it in the Start menu, go over the Services tab and scroll down and look for DrivePool Service. And then you can right-click on that and go Stop. Alternatively, you can actually start a administrative command prompt. This won't work from a regular command prompt, so just type CMD like you normally would. Right-click on command prompt, run as administrator. Okay, and then the command you want to run is net stop DrivePool service. Okay, now when we run this, we should see DrivePool service stop over here, which is what we want. Basically, DrivePool is saying, hey, I can't find the service I need here to run DrivePool. So we want that to be deactivated while we do a SnapRAID sync. Then once you've done the sync, go back over here and do a net start DrivePool service. And then everything should come back online, just like that. Alternatively, obviously you can go to the Services tab and Task Manager, right-click and Start. Now I'm going to show how to automate this process so that you don't have to do this every time you go to do a sync. But if you're doing it manually, this is something you want to probably consider. And now just so you know, I'm going to go ahead and delete the pool part folders from the config file. I'm only doing this for demonstration purposes, so for the rest of the video, the pool part files will not be there. It's just because I want to keep it simple for demonstration purposes. Now that we have our parity drive assigned and then our data drives assigned, next we want to look at the content files. Now the content file is this file called snapraid.content. And what this does, this includes the data of the file name, file size, file date, other metadata about the file, but more importantly including the hash values of the blocks assigned to those files. And that's what it uses to verify that your disks and your files on there have not become corrupted. So typically you want to assign this content file to, but I like to just assign it to every disk on the array. The file is going to be the same file on every disk, and its size is dictated by the number of files that you have on the disk. And typically though, it won't be any more than several gigabytes in size. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and put this on the J drive, and by default they put it in the SnapRAID folder, but I would just put it in the root. And also if you're using DrivePool, do not put this in your pool part folder, just put it in the root of the drive. And then drive K. And then lastly, I'm also going to put it on the parity drive, drive P. Some people, though, like to not put the content file on their Parity drive, only because that ensures that your P drive is going to have enough space. If it's the same capacity disk as your largest data disk, it ensures that this little extra snapraid.content file on your data disk consumes that extra little space that you won't have on your P drive to make sure you have enough space for your content file or for your Parity file. Now, that's only really a concern if you tend to fill up your data disks to like almost full capacity. Otherwise, it's not a big deal. I just like to use convention of putting on every disk that's in the array. So once we've assigned that, we can go ahead and save the file. And now we are ready for a sync operation, our first sync to protect our data. Now to go through a sync process, it's pretty straightforward. We want to go to our start menu, go to a command prompt, just a regular command prompt, however you want to get there. Then we're going to want to navigate to where we put our SnapRAID, right? In our case, we put it in the C SnapRAID location. So we want to do a CD/D and C:\SnapRAID. Now I like to do a dir, make sure I'm in the right spot. That looks like it's the right location, same files, right? Here we go. And if you want to be extra paranoid here, just double check, go more, snapraid.conf, and then you can see here, here's our Parity file here. Hit the space bar to go down more. You can see there's our content files and our data drives. Everything looks like it's correct. So we go ahead and Control C out of that, or just hit space a few more times to get through it. And I'm going to do CLS to clear screen, and we're ready to go. Now for sync operation, it's simply snapraid sync. Okay. Now before I do that though, I just want to make a quick note that Windows is normally agnostic to the case of your letters, uppercase or lowercase. It doesn't care. But because we put this after snapraid, snapraid is actually snapraid.exe. It wants everything in lowercase. So if we do a snapraid capital sync, right, it's going to say, I don't understand that. So we want to do a lowercase snapraid sync. Now when I run this, it's going to go through, it's going to read the config file, right? It's going to say, okay, my Parity drive is here, so this is where I'm going to store my Parity. And then my data disks are here. This is where I'm going to read my data information from so that I can create Parity. And then this is where it's going to store the contents of the file contents and their hash values. So when I run this, hit enter. You can see it running here. Now you can see here it says content not found, basically because it's saying, okay, this is a new, it assumes that it's a new configuration, which it is. And also you can see here it's ignoring recycle bin and other system information, which are under the exclude section of the configuration file. Now if we bring up Task Manager, we can see here our J and K drives are our data drives, right? You can see here it's a pure read operation on both of those. It's reading the data from those disks. The P drive is a pure write operation because it's actually calculating the Parity based on the data drives and storing it on the P drive. Now if we go to those actual disks, you can see here drive J and K. It's created the snapraid.content file. Okay, and also it created snapraid.content file in P, but then you also have the snapraid.parity file. Now you can see here the size of the Parity file is going to be approximately the same size as the disk with the most amount of data. So in our case, the J drive has about 20.3 gigabytes and K drive has 20.3 gigabytes, so it doesn't matter. It's going to be approximately that size, which it is. Now the SnapRAID sync is complete, and what I like to do and what SnapRAID recommends is using a SnapRAID touch command, which will basically modify the sub-second timestamp of every file to make it more unique so it can more clearly identify file duplicates or files that have moved from disk to disk. And do that, and it really only takes a second. And then finally, you want to do a SnapRAID scrub. Now, if you do a scrub, basically the scrub command will read the data files, it will calculate Parity and checksum, and then it will compare that to the Parity and checksum that has already been stored on your Parity and your snapraid.content files. It's basically just to validate, okay, have your files changed at all since the last time data had been synced or scrubbed. So if we just do a SnapRAID scrub though with this new array, it's going to say nothing to do, right? And the reason for that is if you go to the SnapRAID website, go under manual, and you can see down here under section 4.1, I believe, yep. You can see here, by default, the snapraid scrub command checks about 8% of the array, but not data already scrubbed in the previous 10 days. So basically what it does is, and the reason why they do this, I think they say that somewhere down here, is the idea behind this is if you scrub your data once a week, it's going to scrub 8% of your data, nothing older that hasn't been scrubbed in the last 10 days. And so if you do that every week, it should scrub your entire array once every 3 months. But what I like to do after I sync data is I like to do a snapraid scrub-p new. What that will do is it will scrub any data that's been newly added to the array. Obviously, since this is a new array, it's going to scrub everything. And this process, again, it's going to just be a read operation on everything, because basically it's reading all the data, it's calculating new parity and checksum, and it's going to compare it to the parity and checksum that it's already stored in its parity and snapraid content file. So if we go here, you can see here on the J drive, it's a read operation, K drive, other data drive, read operation, and parity drive, also a read operation. You can see here now, it says, now that the scrub is complete, everything is okay. Now everything should be protected in the array. I'd also like to mention that even though in this demonstration I'm giving here, I only have 2 data disks and 1 parity drive, you can also obviously add additional data disks as you have them. If you have 3 or 4 data disks, just keep adding to the config file here to whatever you want. And then obviously when you go to sync for the first time, it'll add those disks to the array. And the same thing with the parity drives. You can go up here and just delete the hashtag there, and then make sure you set the proper drive letter for your additional parity disk. So, and you can do this before your first sync, or you can do it after your first sync. Now if you do it after your first sync with the parity, I'm going to show you real quick something that'll happen. So for example, let's say I've already synced my array, I've got my 2 data disks, my 1 parity disk, and I want to add an additional data disk and additional parity disk to my array. I'm going to go to disk management here, and then I'm going to go and I've got this extra disk here. I'm going to add this as a new data disk, call it drive L because my other ones are J and K, call it data 3, right? Next, and finish. There we go. Now it's an empty drive obviously, but now I'm going to add just the data drive to the config file. So I'm going to go down to the data section, go with data D3 L :/, and then the content, I probably want to add the content file to that as well. Go to the content section, content L, and call it snapraid.content. Save that and then do a sync. So go to your SnapRAID folder, and all you have to do is do a SnapRAID sync. It'll, because you added that to the config file, it'll pick that up and say, okay, we're going to add this to the array. Poof, and you can see here verified snapraid.content and is there. So if we go to our L drive, and now is part of the array, okay? So I can add a new file in here, new test doc, right? And if we go here and do a snapraid diff, see here now it wants to add that file to the array. And if you notice too, I am using DrivePool, and this drive is not part of DrivePool. It doesn't need to be, right? It can be any disks in your system. So that's a nice thing to do there. So once I add that file, I do a snapraid sync, and now that file I just added to the L drive is now protected. Do the same for parity now. Let's say, okay, we've got 3 data disks, but I want 2 parity drives now. Go in your snapraid config file. Well, first you probably want to go in your disk management here, and you want to initialize the disk, new simple volume, and our other parity drive is called P, so we'll call this one Q. Yeah, wrong one, come on again. There. And then we'll call this parity 2. Okay, and finish. And now we've got our new drive here. It's going to be our second parity disk. So we go down to our snapraid config file, and down underneath the parity section here, we're going to delete this hashtag, and 2-parity is going to be drive Q now, right? And it's going to be called snapraid.2-parity. So now you go back to, go ahead and save that, and then we're going to do a snapraid sync, like we usually do. Okay, I didn't add that as a content file on purpose here because I don't want to. And it's going to balk at us and say, oh, warning, the 2-parity has 0 blocks instead of 83,169. Basically, if you add a parity disk after your initial sync, then you have to do a snapraid sync and then do a -- force full. And then we'll go ahead and generate a new parity file for drive Q. So now this sync is complete. And if we look over here on our Q drive, this parity drive is on drive Q, snapraid.2-parity, and then we have our original one on the P drive. Now you'll notice that the file sizes, 21,291, 264, is the same size as the parity drive on drive Q. This does not mean that these parity files are duplicates of each other. They contain the parity information to recover data from all the files that are protecting, but it uses different blocks of data from different disks between the two different parity files, so that way you have a higher chance of recovery if you have some file corruption or deleted files from another disk. So you can't just copy this to another disk and say, okay, this is going to be my second parity. No, you have to generate it through the snapraid sync command. Now for the remainder of the video, I'm going to go back and revert to just a single parity and 2 data disks. I just wanted to show you this as an option. There's a few commands that you might want to be aware of for that you can use with snapraid, and one of them is snapraid status. And as the name implies, basically it will give you the latest status of your snapraid array, and effectively snapraid scrub, snapraid sync, and any issues that it may have. Obviously, currently there's not much information here because this is a new array, but if you had a more seasoned array, it would give you a lot more statistics. Additionally, you can do a snapraid diff. And what this will do, this will show you the changes that have been made to your array since the last sync, so that way you know what's going to be committed at the following sync. And in this case, we can see here that we have nothing added, removed, updated, moved, copied, or restored. So now we can go to one of our files, and we can, let's say we create a new file in here, and we'll call it just new text doc.txt. And when we go to do a snapraid diff now, it'll detect that change, and you can even see here, add pool part here, new text doc.txt. So that means that one file that's going to be added is going to be added at the next sync. So if we go snapraid sync, it's now been added, and we do a snapraid diff, it's no longer showing there. And same thing happens if we delete the file, right? We delete it, we do a snapraid diff. It says, okay, one file is going to be removed. Look up here in the information above and look at remove pool part, new text doc.txt. Now, just so you know, this warning, ignore special system directory file. In this case, don't worry about that. If you're running DrivePool, this is going to show up a lot because any system folders or files that show up in the pool part folder, it tends to flag it as a warning in snapraid. It really is not a problem. Now, the last command that you're going to want to do is snapraid list. Okay, if I just do this, this is going to give you a directory list of all the files and folders that are protected by the snapraid array. Obviously, it doesn't help a whole lot to just output it to console here. So you can output it to a log file, type snapraid list, and then you want to use a right caret, which will create a new log file, and we'll call it snaplist.log. Okay. Now we'll go ahead and do that, and we go to our C drive, C snapraid folder, and snaplist. You should see snaplist.log there, and there you go. It gives you the file size, file date, and then the file path and the file name of all the files that are protected by the array. Now that our data is protected by SnapRAID, I'm going to go and show you how to automate this process as well as save the sync and scrub operations to a log file so you can reference those in the future. And to do this, we're going to actually make use of a batch file as well as the task scheduler option in Windows. So go back to your SnapRAID executable location, in my case c:\snapraid, and then we're going to want to create a batch file to run the sync command. So we're going to go ahead and right click in an open area here, new text document, and we're going to call it, I'll call it snap sync.bat and delete the text extension. And yes, you want to change it. Now you can go ahead and right click on it. Where did it go? And edit. So you're going to want to edit this in Notepad. So typical convention, at echo off, just so it doesn't repeat everything that it puts down here. And then you want to do a cd space /d %, squiggly dp0. What this does is it tells it to move to the folder that this batch file is being run from. And typically it'll do that automatically, but if you run it as an administrator, sometimes it'll run it from the C system32 and then it can't find files and stuff like that. So this is just convention that I like to use. Now all we have to do is do a snapraid sync. And then we go ahead and go File, Save. And now we're going to use Task Scheduler to automate this process. So go down to your Start menu, type Task, and you'll see Task Scheduler here. Go ahead and open it. Then you want to click on the Task Scheduler library, and then go to Action, Create Task. All right, you're going to get this little pop-up here, and in the first tab here under General, give it a friendly name, whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to call it SnapRAID Sync. And then don't touch anything else down here. If you're going to run it with the DrivePool, later I'll show you what you have to do here, but you're going to want to run with highest privileges, basically as an administrator, if you want to do the net start stop DrivePool service. But for now, leave everything else untouched. Go over to the Triggers tag and click on New. And then you want to make sure begin the task on a schedule. And we want to do a sync, let's say every day, and we're going to start it tomorrow and every day at 1 a.m. So basically you want to sync when your data is not really being active. Whatever time works for you, I'm going to use middle of the night for me. And then recur every 1 day and click OK. Don't touch anything else here. And then go over to the Actions tab, go ahead and click New, and then make sure Actions Started Program is selected. It should be by default. Go down to Program Script, click on Browse, and then go down to your snapsync.bat file that you created in your c:\snapraid folder or wherever you put that. And click Open, and that's all there is to it. Then click OK, and then click OK. Now you can see here that it created SnapRAID Sync task. Now I'm going to go back to my snapraid.sync.bat file, and I'm going to add a command at the bottom here called pause. Basically it'll pause this operation just so we can see if it's actually working. Save it. Then I'm going to go back over to Task Scheduler, right click, and run. And here you can see here it's actually running. So it's working. Okay. And we want to do the same thing now for a scrub operation. So we can just copy and paste the snapsync.bat file or create a new one, whatever you want to do. And we're going to name this one snap scrub.bat. Okay, right click, edit. And then we're going to want to do the same information up here, but then we're going to want to put SnapRAID scrub. In this case, you want to put the amount you want to scrub. In this case, by default, does 8% with any data that hasn't been scrubbed in the last 10 days. Let's say you want to do it once a month, so we want to do 25%, and then you can do 7 days, 3 days, 5 days, doesn't matter. Just make it under a week. I'll put 5 days, so anything older than 5 days will be scrubbed in 25% of the data. And then that's all you have to do. Go ahead and file and save. We're going to go back to Task Scheduler. We're going to go back again, go Action, Create Task. This time we're going to call it SnapRAID Scrub. Right? And again, don't touch anything else on here. go to the Triggers tab, go ahead and click New. And this time we want to scrub maybe once a week, right? So make sure it's on a schedule is selected, and we want to do it weekly. And it doesn't matter what day we select here. We'll say we do it every Tuesday at, say, 3 a.m. Now you want the scrub process to occur with plenty of time after a sync process has completed. Otherwise, the scrub process won't activate. So since we're going to sync every day at 1 a.m., we can set up a scrub at, say, 3 a.m. on Tuesday. And on Tuesday, recur every week. And everything else, just leave it untouched. Click OK. Now we go over to the Actions tab here. Go ahead and click New. And Start a Program under the Action should be selected by default. Click on Browse. And then you want to choose now the snap scrub.bat file in your SnapRAID folder that we created. Go ahead and OK and OK and OK. And here we see SnapRAID scrub. Now I'm going to go back to the SnapRAID scrub command and add, I already have the pause command there. And we're going to go ahead and right click and run. And it's working. Because we had already scrubbed the entire array, it's going to say nothing to do, right? So we know that works. Now you want to go back and delete that pause command, otherwise that window will never close when it's automated. And go ahead and save each of those. And there we go. Now that's pretty basic, and that'll get you up and running, right? Now if you want to go into your SnapRAID sync.bat file, you might want to add SnapRAID touch like we did before. So every time it syncs your data, it'll go ahead and touch the files to make sure that the sub-second timestamp's been updated, refreshed. And then we want to do a SnapRAID scrub-p new. So any new data that's been added to the array, it'll basically go back and validate that everything's been copied properly. Then go ahead and save that. And now we're good to go, right? It'll go through all three of those processes. But one more thing is that we probably want to log this, right? Now SnapRAID does have a way to add a date and timestamp to your log files, which is nice because Windows batch file does not include that natively. You can write a quick little script to do that, and I tend to do that myself just because I think it's nice to be able to control what that date timestamp is and add it to multiple files in that batch file. But in this case, I'll show you how to use the built-in one. So let's say that you want to log the sync operation here in your snapsync.bat file. So we go to that line SnapRAID sync, and we hit a space dash lowercase l. That is a lowercase l, not the number 1. Space and an open quote. Then you want to put the location where you're going to put the log files. Now I just like to use relative paths. You can do the absolute path if you want to, but regardless, if you're going to put it in a separate folder, that folder has to exist already because SnapRAID will not create that folder for you. So in this case, I want to put it in my SnapRAID folder in a new folder called logs. So I go ahead and create that folder, and that's where it's going to store the log files. So I can go in here and I can right click, copy and paste, and I can just do the absolute location, but I like to use relative location just because if I happen to move that SnapRAID folder somewhere else, I don't have to worry about that. So for relative path, it's sensitive to, you can't just do like /logs/ and like that. What you need to do is you either need to do a dot for current location /capital logs, then close slash, or you can do just logs/ and then the name of the log file. Now, SnapRAID does include a date timestamp option for you, which is nice because Windows Batch does not offer this natively. You have to create a little script in order to create a date timestamp. I do that personally just because I can control what the date timestamp is, use the same date timestamp on different processes in the same batch file. But I'll just show you the SnapRAID way, and I can show you that separate script later if you're interested. In any case, to put the date stamp, %D, capital D, underscore, %, capital T for the time, and underscore. It doesn't have to be underscore, I just like to do this for convention. So it's going to put the date in year, month, day format, underscore, and then hour, minute, second format, and then underscore, and then whatever we want to name the log file. In this case, I'll just call it snapsync.log, close quotes. Okay? And then we probably want to do the same thing with the scrub new command. So we go here, -L, same location, logs, %% capital D underscore %% capital T underscore snap scrub new dot log, right? I can type and go ahead and save that. Now, when we run the program, we can either go back to our SnapRAID location, just double click on SnapRAID sync, or we can go to task scheduler and right click and run there. Do that. It's processing. Now it should have stored those snap sync and snap scrub new in the log files here. So we can open those up and you have your information available. Okay. And we probably want to do the same thing with the scrub command. So if you open up your snapscrub.bat file, and again at the end you want to put a dash lowercase l space open quote logs backslash, we'll call this %% capital D underscore %% capital T, and then snap scrub.log file. And the same thing will happen here. We'll go ahead and save it, and then we'll run it. And we go to our logs, and there's our snap scrub command, and there's the results. Okay, so now everything is automated. Every time, every day at 1 a.m., SnapRAID sync is going to run. Then every Tuesday at 3 a.m., SnapRAID scrub will run. So obviously your computer has to be on and running in order for this to work, but now it's pretty much hands-off. If you are using DrivePool, on the snapsync.bat file that you created, you're going to want to add a command to stop and start DrivePool service. I'm going to go ahead and open up DrivePool here real quick. Minimize it. And at the start of your snapsync.bat file, you're going to want to put net stop DrivePool service, just like we did in the example previously in the command line. Okay, and then at the end of the batch file, you're going to want to put net start DrivePool service. So that way it'll stop the DrivePool service, it'll run through the SnapRAID operations, sync and scrub operations, and then start it back up again. I want to go ahead and save that. And now in order for this to work, this has to run as an administrator. By default, it just runs as a regular user account. So if you go to your task scheduler here, you're going to go to your sync command here, sync option. You're going to go ahead and double click on that, and then you're going to want to select run with highest privileges. Okay, so if we do that, do OK. Now when we run the sync command, or sync batch file, and we'll bring up DrivePool here, we should see that service go down because we told it to stop, run. See here it stopped it. It's running the sync command, followed by the touch and the scrub command, and it's starting up the service again. Just like that. Now, you can add the same thing to your scrub command or scrub batch file if you want. It's not as necessary because scrub is basically just a read operation, but if you don't want it to be have additional processes happening to your disk at the time, you can do the same thing here, net stop DrivePool service. And then at the end, net start DrivePool service, and save, and then we will go back to task scheduler and go ahead and do a trial run. Actually want to open that up and make sure we check the run with highest privileges check mark here. Click OK. Now we'll right click it and run, and we should see DrivePool stopping and then starting up again. So it works. That's only if you have DrivePool running, obviously. So now you have everything set up, you have everything automated, your data is protected with SnapRAID, you have everything dumped to a log file, but you may be wondering, okay, so how do I know my data is protected? There's a number of different ways to do this, and one way is you can go into your log file and just manually go in, take a look at it, see if it shows any issues. Typically, whenever a sync or scrub operation is okay, usually it gives us a message status symbol here, and it says nothing to do, or it says everything is okay. so you can just kind of go through your logs here. That's kind of cumbersome though, right? So you can go through a command prompt. Again, you want to go back to your SnapRAID folder. So start menu CMD and enter cd/d c:\snapraid. And here we are. And you can use the snapraid status command. Okay. And obviously here it's not showing any issues, but if you had any issues, it would show up here. And then it should give you details on what files are affected or whatever. Alternatively, you can go ahead and go to your logs folder, right? And there's our log files that we created. And you can pipe these through what's called a find string command. But what you want to look for when you do this is, like I noted before, down below here, anytime anything is good, it throws up a message status command and says nothing to do or everything okay. So you can go ahead and do a find string, and you do /i to say ignore case of the characters, whether it's upper or lowercase, doesn't matter. Then you want to put what you want to find. In this case, we want to find message status, message : status : close quote. And then we have to tell it where we want to look for this information. So you can just type in a specific file name, log file, or you can just do star.log, and it'll look through every log file in this location where we're at, in the snapraid.logs folder. And there we go. All of them say nothing to do, so we're good. So obviously, if you just have a few log files, it's not a big deal. But if you have hundreds, okay, you can see, okay, there's a whole bunch of files here that says everything okay or nothing to do, but it doesn't isolate the 1 or 2 files that may actually show that there was an issue. So to do that, typically whenever there's an issue with a sync or scrub, it puts in what's called a message fatal command in there. So we can use the find string command for that. And instead of message status, we're going to do message fatal. Everything else is going to be the same. And poof, it's going to find this. Well, I just want to note with DrivePool, anytime that you have a system folder or file in the pool part folder, for whatever reason it flags it as a warning in SnapRAID, it's not a problem, it's not an issue, it's just a quirk. So you can safely ignore this. But obviously when we're trying to look for issues, we don't want to have a whole bunch of these ignoring special system directory alerts here, right? So to counter that, we can go ahead and push the up arrow and bring up our other log or find string command here. Hit space, put the pipe symbol, the vertical line, and then we can do another find string command. So basically it's going to take this information, then we're going to pipe it through and tell it to ignore anything that has ignoring special system directory text in it. So we'll do, again, /i and a /v. V basically means not. And then in quotes, we want to put this text. So you can go up here and highlight it and right click. Sorry, you want to do a Control-C. And then go down here and either right click or Control-V. Then end quote. And then hit enter. Okay, now it's looking for all this information. And then the /v says, okay, ignore anything that has this text in it. And in this case, all this information, nothing here. There's nothing that comes back. So that's good, right? It says, okay, there's no logs that have issues. Now, just to show that this is actually working, I'm going to go into this log file here and just manually put in a message fatal command. We'll just put, it doesn't matter where we put it. And we will call this demonstration test fail. Okay, and save this. And we go back here. And if we do the original look for this, right, we can see all those warnings again. And we see the demonstration test fail this time. So it shows it's showing up. But if we pipe it through with this extra find string command, it only filters out that demonstration test fail. So anything with this ignoring special system directory, none of those show up here, which is what we want. Now, obviously, having to type this in all the time can be a little bit cumbersome, so you may want to save this to a batch file and run this that way. So if you want to automate this, you can go ahead and go back to your SnapRAID folder here. And then again, we're going to create another batch file. Right click and go new text document. We'll call this one snap status.bat and delete the .text extension. Oops. And we want to say yes, we want to change it. And then right click snap status.bat and edit. And then we're going to create a new batch file, add echo off. And again, cd/d %squiggly dp0. And then we want to do a find string /i message fatal, close quote, and we want to look in all the log files. In this case, because we are in the SnapRAID directory, right, we want to actually tell it to look in the logs folder and then look at all the logs in there, .log. And then again, we want to pipe this to, again, find string /i/v, and then ignoring special single quote system directory, single quote, and then put a close quote at the end of that. And then we should be good to go. And then I'm going to go ahead and put a pause command here so we can actually see what happens when we run this. Okay, so added that, I saved it, and here's the SnapRAID status. I'll go ahead and run it. And here it found that one instance of message fatal there, like we had seen before. Now you can go one step further here. So you can pipe this to a log file, and to do that, go to the end of this line here and put 2 right carets. Basically, a single one will write to create a new log. If the log exists, it's just going to write over it. Probably don't want to do that, so we'll just do a double caret here, which will just append to any log. Or if the log doesn't exist, it'll create it, and then it'll just append on to that. Then we want to put, we'll call it snapfail.log, or snapfatal, we'll call it snapfatal.log. Okay, so now when we run this command, I'm going to go back here and delete the pause statement. I already did. Okay, never mind. Whoops. No problems clicking today. So we delete the pause command because we're actually going to log this to a file. Go back here. We can go ahead and double click the snapstatus.bat file, and it created the snapfatal.log, and there it told us the same thing. So we can run this as many times as we want. Say a week later you run it, and then you have more files. Right? It's just going to keep appending to this. So this is a quick and easy way that you can go in and actually create a log file, and then you can just open that log file periodically and see if there's any problems. Now I do have a way to completely automate this process so you can get an email or a text message, but it's a little bit more involved. It's not something that's native within Windows. You need a Microsoft account, a OneDrive account, and then a Microsoft Power Automate account, but those are all free, and basically you create a Microsoft account, you can actually get those all for free. But that'll be a separate video if that's something you're interested in seeing. In any case, that's the way I would go about it for now. It seems pretty straightforward, and really not a big deal to somehow open that log file periodically to figure out what's wrong with your array, if anything. Now you can take this one step further even if you'd like to. Instead of having to manually run the snapstatus.bat file, you can either go into Task Scheduler and set up a new task to run that snapstatus.bat on a regular basis, however often you want to, or you can go ahead and let's go back into here, edit this, take this command here, and then you can throw it at the end of your snapsync batch file here, right? And then it will basically extract all the information from your log files and just add it on to that fatal log file. So you can see, just check that on a regular basis. Conversely, instead of actually putting that in there, whoops, you can just call the, oops, snapstatus.bat file directly instead. One or the other, doesn't matter, same thing. Right? And then you can do the same thing with snap scrub. Go in here, and after it runs the scrub, go snapstatus.bat, save that, and now when those commands run, it's actually going to output to that snapfatal.log file. So I'm going to go ahead and run snapsync.bat, and since I kept that demonstration test file there, it keeps adding it onto there. So that's another way that you can do this. So that's all there is for now. Thanks for tuning in. Now I am actually working on a separate video which will kind of go through different scenarios for SnapRAID. So basically how to add additional disks, what to do if you have a failed disk, things like that. And as well as another video talking about a parity hole and why with SnapRAID you should not delete files in between syncs. You should basically just move your files outside of your protected array until your next sync, and then you can delete the data, so that way you don't risk losing data should you delete files, have another disk fail, and then you can't actually recover all your data because it creates a hole in your parity. It's not as scary as it sounds. because you should also have a separate backup of your data anyways. And SnapRAID is not a full-featured backup solution, but it definitely makes things convenient, and it protects you from corruption. So until next time, thanks for tuning in.